what you have here in front of you are two icons in the industry. And I say the industry because this is really a network of networks, a team of teams, an ecosystem of ecosystems. So everything that has got us to this point, years and years of Jim creating a model of people talking, startups, entrepreneurs, venture capital, innovators, creators, all those things that go in this ecosystem are going to be talked about here in a couple minutes. I'm not going to try to provide bios to these two gentlemen because it would take me an hour and a half just to start on page one of what they've done, but I'll ask them to kind of do that. But we're going to talk about a couple things that maybe is a little different. We're going to start with a couple slides from Art after the introductions. And really want to focus on a couple things, which is life sciences and healthcare. Right? People use that term very loosely. That's a huge, huge marketplace with a lot of definition in there, and some people get a little confused and unknown about where they are. And if you say you're a life cycle or a healthcare business, you better be, just understand where you play in that particular space. The other thing is, we talk about as entrepreneurs, the importance of a team, and how do you develop that team, right? How do you build it? How do you co-work? How do you develop expertise? How do you work on a board of advisors that's going to really take you from where you are to where you need to be? And these things go through sine waves, and there's expertise at the startup in the very kind of early nascent stages. There's some expertise that has to come in right as you're starting to ramp and grow, and then there's some expertise that comes out at different levels. And so we'll talk a little bit of all that. So before I go to some slides, Mike, would you just give a couple seconds background, and I'll do the slide clicking for you so you can just talk. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm Michael Donlin. I've been in healthcare for 20 plus years in consulting, in medical devices most recently, and remote care, digital care, and moved to Wilmington about 6 years ago from Seattle. But Jim, big thanks to you for really pushing this and keeping us all organized and really promoting Wilmington. It's good.
And Seattle is kind of the hub of some incubators.
Yeah, I can talk about that in a second because there's a good story there, but absolutely.
So I'm Art Pappas. I'm the managing partner at Pappas Capital. Interesting story. Jim prompted me to think about that when he had mentioned the military. I came here because of the military. I came to Fort Bragg with Special Forces, Special Operations, and then fell in love with the state. I was doing my education in New York at Stony Brook University in marine biology, and after traveling out of New York, decided, I don't think I'm going to go back to New York. So I looked at UNC Wilmington, thinking this is going to be a great transition. Here I am in marine biology. What better place to go to? And they wouldn't accept me as a resident. They accepted me, but I couldn't afford non-resident tuition. So I applied to the water schools along the East Coast, then to two freshwater schools where I had never stepped foot in my entire life. One was Ohio State University, the other one was University of Michigan. And Ohio State had this program that they brought me in as a resident. I had to do certain things for 5 years, but ended up going to Ohio State. And the first chance I had was to come back here when this was after a number of years in pharmaceuticals. And my last corporate position was CEO of Glaxo International. And I had this, I built my reputation on highly decentralized international organizations, putting locals in place, which is very akin to the venture capital industry, if you think about it, doing it that way. And then set up the banking office here in North Carolina for Latin America and Canada, set up an office in the UK for Middle East Africa, and then set up the manufacturing offices and operations for Singapore, for Asia Pacific out of Singapore. So when I decided to leave Glaxo and get into the biotech world, it was at an opportune time. There, I was also on the main board of directors of Glaxo, so I had a chance to see how biotech might be emerging. So 28 years ago, I had this opportunity to do that. And even though I wasn't going immediately into biotechnology, I did more project financing and merchant banking. And my first company that we worked with was Quintiles out of the University of North Carolina. And the founder there, Dennis Gillings, matter of fact, the founder at that time, as well as Fred Eshelman, who was setting up PPD, had left Glaxo to finish up operating PPD. Both of them had asked me to help them look at the international markets and set them up as the first CRO in East Asia. And then Fred got distracted. And Dennis persisted, and we worked with Quintiles to set them up in East Asia as the first CRO in East Asia out of Singapore. And then did that for a few years, then got into the venture capital business. So did you want to do some more, or do you want me to keep
So
going?
I mean, just, there's no experience here. I just want to put that on the table. So yeah, let's go through your slides, because I think you're going to present some really interesting topics from an ecosystem perspective, and there's some really unique things you talk about, a total entrepreneurial activity. We have some co-working kind of conversation, some team development, some structuring in the human capital. I think that's really of interest to us. If you want to take us through
Sure.
a couple slides, we'll start there.
So within Pappas Capital, we have 3 business lines. One is our Pappas Venture. So we've got $800 million that we've raised over our various funds. Pappas Ventures is our flagship business. We have our specialist fund group, and then our translational medicine initiative, which will tie into these slides. Our investor base is a third of it comes from the corporate side, 12 pharmaceutical companies and 2 CROs. The other third are family offices, and the other third are institutional. So when we looked at this market at North Carolina, we made the decision with our first funds to not invest just in North Carolina, because we saw a lot of science projects. We saw First Flight was there, we had the biotech center there, a lot of science projects, and then said, okay, look, let's do a national footprint, because you need a lot of capital for a life science company. And therefore, having investments on the East Coast and up in the Northeast would put us in a position to also target the undercapitalized markets in that regard. And that helped us build some really good, strong syndicate relationships. So the slides I have here, we're doing this across in a number of markets. We're doing it across North Carolina, one in this area, which this is an actual working slide within our group. And I'm not going to go through each of the details on these slides, but to give you an idea how we've been thinking about it, and then how we looked at this area from an investment perspective, is that the national trends that we see that's driving entrepreneurship. And a lot of it has to do with the age of the entrepreneurs, the motivation to be in the environmental and social changing area, and then the access to enhanced technologies from a variety of different avenues, including First Flight and other areas where you can bring in technology, but they can also introduce you to technology. That map on that side is the one prepared by the North Carolina Biotechnology Center that shows how the different pockets here are developing in a really unique way. This shows the North Carolina deal activity. So it gives you an idea of the dollars that have gone to work over this 5-year period and the number of deals that are driving it. Look, even North Carolina playing in this national footprint is still in a nascent area. I mean, it really is early stages even for us. And like when we tell states that come to us to work with them, like Texas with Baylor University, don't compare yourself to, they want to be like California. Don't compare yourself with California. Think about competing with North Carolina, Indiana, Maryland. Those are the markets that'll make a real difference and further grow our footprint in this regard. This next slide. There we go. So this is kind of zeroing down into your area at this point, in addition to the deals that were done. But we found this pretty intriguing to think about the hospital sales that have occurred here. We're working with a group in the western part of North Carolina in the ag tech area. They've had a number of similar things happening there, and they have a pool of capital now. They're trying to figure out how to put to work and enhance agriculture in the state. They don't have many of the things that you have out here. And in fact, one could be critical of some of the capabilities that we have, like with granting programs, not to do more out in that part of the state. Where here, you are getting the benefit of that. We heard a little bit about that already. And then you do have some venture groups that are clearly looking at this area to see what could be developed. So why Wilmington? So you see the Singapore and the China flag there. So one of the funds we have is a $200 million fund, US dollar fund, that was set up to invest in disruptive technologies, AI, quantum computing, biotech, and advanced materials, with all of that coming into healthcare at some point. The target markets for that fund are companies, early stage companies domiciled in Singapore, mainland China, and Hong Kong. It's kind of going against the grain. Not to bring these companies here, but to develop their technologies in those markets and take advantage of bringing them into here if it works out. Singapore was interesting. We were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago in Singapore, and they were telling me about the fact that they've got a big project going on here in the student facilities. You probably know this, right? China has the same thing. But why not talk to them about the lab space? They were talking to us about lab space, but why not talk to them about lab space? By the way, in that relationship, we also did our first investment out of this fund is with Duke University and the National University of Singapore. As some of you may know, Duke has a medical school in Singapore. And this is an echocardiograph platform that's been digitized so that it can be read much easier by like a PA or someone that's been trained. And it's just revolutionized how to deal with cardiograms in that regard. But anyway, when we looked at this for Wilmington and what's all happened here, even with the fact that PPD was here and is kind of rationalizing itself, it's a robust area. And the one thing, when we looked at some of the technology pieces you have going on here, besides marine and international interest, you know, this new wave in biotech is called tech bio. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but there's an emergence of tech bio, which for some of us that have been in the industry a long time, akin to combinatorial chemistry or high throughput screening. Those were platforms, or systems biology, and everyone that invested in those platforms for pure platform's sake didn't do very well, because all that got absorbed into improving other processes. Well, this tech bio phenomena is pretty interesting, because what it's doing is it's looking at how advanced technologies will work with biotechnology, but do it in a way that you keep the founders of those technologies more in place than we did in the past with the older tech platforms. When you think about how the venture business built out those combinatorial chemistry, for example, they started, matter of fact, one of the leading companies came out of Duke. It was a company called Sphinx. I don't know if anybody here remembers it. Got acquired ultimately by Lilly. And Lilly moved it out of here, and that's what's made Lilly's combinatorial chemistry platform so robust. But the idea is to keep the founders of that, not turn it over to some gray-haired guys that come out of pharma to help build those companies, but keep those founders in place, preserve, to the comments made earlier, the capital base with some non-dilutive funding, get it through some more important proof of concepts. And there's about 5 funds now, most of them in California, that have been set up to advance this idea. But when you look at what you've got here, it almost prompts the thought, certainly prompted the thought in our shop. Why not look at something that ties together and keeps a founder more in place if you find the right investigator or the right group here? And you've got a robust angel network. You've got groups that want to work with angel groups and figure out a way to do it. So these slides are available. It's our own in-house research. It's not overly complete in that regard, but it gives you an idea of how we as a venture firm would look at targeting this part of the state where we will probably end up doing something here. My guess is we'll probably do something in marine. Within our specialized fund group, we also do fund-to-fund investments. We also sponsor new managers that want to do their first-time funds. So we are looking at this for some opportunity.
I'm sure Sam McCall would like to talk to you as soon as this panel is over.
Art, thank you for that. Pretty amazing. Michael, can you take that and expand in your life sciences mind and all of that to wrap in your thought process as you look at opportunities, potentials, and then really kind of the team dynamics and team structures?
Yeah, well, I just want to rewind a little bit because I think it's important. So Art's right, Seattle today is a big hub of entrepreneurial, med tech, all that, but that wasn't always the case. And when I lived there, this is probably about a dozen years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I was with Accenture and I was working with Cambia Health Plan, which is a big Blues plan out of Seattle. And we were lamenting the fact that there's so much technology brain horsepower in Seattle with Microsoft, with Amazon, with all these big companies, but it wasn't aimed at healthcare. There wasn't really a med tech then, right? And so they went about this process, they called it Cambia Grove, which was basically this initiative to really start to incubate med tech in Seattle. And they built out like a co-working space to do that, but started to think about bringing in that ecosystem. You've heard that word a lot today, right? And bring in those elements, right? And I was a mentor for that, and we'd have these companies and these really sharp technology entrepreneurs, but they weren't really sure how to focus on life sciences and what were the problems they were serving. So we started to bring in healthcare systems and started to do reverse pitches, and they would say, here's what we're struggling with. And there were such great resources there on the tech side. They're like, well, wait, we can solve that. We can do that, right? And we started to build out this whole, this ecosystem, but we certainly with the entrepreneurs, but we bring in, specialty technology guys. We'd bring in the lawyers. We'd bring in the CPAs. We'd bring in the patent attorneys and start to build this out, right? And it really, and that's the reason why today you've got, companies like Accolade, like 98.6, like, Carrot Fertility. That was the foundation. And I say that because it's the same feeling today I get here, right? It's this sort of this inflection point where we've got all these sort of separate pieces that are starting to coalesce and starting to, to bring it in. And Jim, that's why you can't leave, because you're like the glue that's pulling this together, and it just feels like now's the right time, right? And so that's where I got started with angel funding, certainly on the healthcare technology side, and I brought that here. When I was here, I was a little disappointed that not more was going on here, right? And so I joined Wilmington Investor Network, WIN, and I've done a bunch of investments through them. But that's, it's not local, right? Some of it is, but it's sort of more national. But there's a real opportunity to do that. And we started to get that. I don't know if some of you were at Tech Mountain, where that was the kind of the co-working space, and you started to get that. You started to get that collaboration just organically. But then when they closed down, and with the pandemic, we sort of lost that. So that's why we invested in Blue Mind Co-working, obviously because there's a need for it. But really, part of the mission and the vision was, let's have a place where these different elements can come together, right? You can support them and incubate them. And one of our mission statements is, graduate these companies out of our space because they're getting too big, right? They need bigger office space, and they can't find the office space. So back to your point on the
Right.
PPD building, but I think that's the real focus. And I think Emil talked about leaning in and really starting to say, hey, we've got the pieces here. Let's start putting them together and really start driving it. And I think Art, you're talking about industry is recognizing that. And the fact that we've got, healthcare, a lot of healthcare here, but just a lot of good technology too that wasn't here, like Encino and Live Oak Bank and all that. Those are technology folks, right? That they can take some of their expertise and let's focus on healthcare, right? What can we do there?
And Mike, can we ask you to talk a little louder on the next, it was hard to hear from this
Gotcha.
side. but-
Yeah.
Yeah, just one of the points you made in Seattle, you mentioned some of that, but some of the early, because of the tech, some of the early life science stuff that came out,
Yeah.
Lee Hood's work and structural genetics,
Yeah,
a bunch
that's
of
right.
good groups came out of there.
Yeah.
So I think we validated that a space is necessary. Would you say that, Michael? A physical space?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I'm pointing over here. I'm looking at you, but
Right.
so there is a
Yeah.
need for that. And then,
There is.
right, getting the right team to come there, right, to coalesce behind the idea, to bring the technology in. So Art, you mentioned this total entrepreneurship activity, TEA. Can you just describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's our way, it's a way of looking at well, Mike said it
Yeah.
better than I could have. I mean, you've got all the pieces moving together here, and when you start seeing that in an entrepreneurial area, you realize, gosh, that's a measurement we should focus on. Because if you don't have those different pieces, you can't do some of the other stuff.
That's right.
And in fact, I think that's, I'm not being critical of the angel investing, but the early days of angel investing, even in the Research Triangle Park, was so difficult because they were going into true biotech rounds. And those entrepreneurs were trying to price them. And then by the time they got to an institutional round, they were getting washed out. And the number of family offices or high net worths in the Research Triangle Park area that got burnt that way was pretty significant.
Yeah.
And it's left a bit of a taint. And, so anyway, that's part of what that means. We're seeing that, and we're seeing the service providers, the stuff that the First Flight is doing, even the Biotech Center, coming out here and trying to set, all that fits together.
But there's a big influx of talent coming here now that with the remote work.
Yeah.
We just see it in our co-working space. We have folks from literally all over the country, right? And then more on life sciences. There's the guy that works for the corporation, right? There's the 1-2-man company, and then there's startups, like Wellvana's in our space, and they're doing extremely well, right?
And Cineos in your building as well?
And Cineos is downstairs, yeah.
Look, you got a guy like Tim Reich's moving back to the area. He's
Yeah.
built a number of companies, sold them, he's
Yeah.
worked with international companies. Gonna
People
come
want to
and
be
sit-
here,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Let's give them a reason to be here.
Stedman Stevens sits here in North Carolina. He provided one of the big pools of capital you got that's going to drive this region in a big way with the sale of that hospital system. Yeah.
So you've got the fintech here. Let's pivot and let's really focus on sort of the med tech, the healthcare
Let's take some of the
science.
tech out of Fin and put it into other stuff. Yeah, I mean.
Well, that's why that phenomena, which is I'm calling tech bio, is pretty
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
And you've got enough stuff here that one should look at it in some way.
Pivot a little bit and talk about cost of capital and whether or not funds are overcapitalized and how they're doing on finding the right deals out there. Can you talk whether or not you're holding a whole bunch of your money back, or are you creating capital stacks in a lot of the startups? Are you funding aggressively, or are you a little bit kind of in the wait and hold?
So we're investing, within Pappas Ventures, we're investing out of Fund 5. And we had the potential to do 2 more investments out of that fund. And we made the decision when we hit the downturn to hold back and save that money to put into our portfolio companies if they needed. So we're holding
Sure.
back. We're also raising Fund 6, which has been an interesting scenario. All our family offices, we have high demand from family offices to come into our funds, and our pharma companies have come into our funds. But going to the institutional side is tougher, believe it or not. Even with a good track record, we've got a great financial track record, but we've also had 25 FDA-approved products have come out of our portfolio companies. So, but even with that, there's not just our fund, but all funds are having a headwind in terms of bringing in institutional capital. There's a lot of money out there, but it's going to larger pools that won't necessarily address the markets we're talking about.
So that's an important piece for the entrepreneurs in the room to understand that calculus that's occurring. So there's money coming in the top, right? Then there's some holdback to money going out, right, to the entrepreneurs. And it's keep your powder dry, make sure you have 24 months of operating capital, cut your costs. I mean, those are the kind of conversations that entrepreneurs need to understand, because if you're undercapitalized or your markets aren't able to buy the product, you're going to be a hobby at some point, and that's not good for yourself or investors. So really appreciate that.
But the non-dilutive conversation that was held earlier is a really important one, because if you can use those grants to get to some, at least speaking in the life science arena, get to some reasonable proof of concept, or get you to be able to confirm that you're IND enabling, that's valuable. That can translate then into a good VC round.
Absolutely, as long as you don't turn into a grant house, right? You're using
Yeah,
that
yeah,
to prove concept, to commercialize,
And,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
you don't necessarily feel that those grants go into your pre-money valuation.
So that's not revenue.
Yeah.
But in terms of investing volumes and velocity, I was looking at data this morning that healthcare and life sciences is still one of those bright spots where there's a lot of investment dollars going into that, but that's one. But from a corporate standpoint, like Amazon, we are looking, we see this market as there's a lot of companies out there that we can start to scoop up and start to piece together.
Sure.
And so I don't see a slowdown there.
Yeah. Do you see, last question, I'll turn it over to questions, but do you see more of the widget sale, right, the medical device, or is it the data play behind those that are really of interest at both kind of initial funding and then kind of the later stage kind of valuations? Because two very different models, a razor and a razor blade, a widget, but data kind of that goes behind, especially in an Amazon kind of.
Yeah, from my experience, it's data is always data analytics, right? But it's more specialty, either specialty care, behavioral health, obviously, right, is a big one. But the more specialized you are and you have that niche, and if you can gain market share in that niche, I think you're well positioned. Versus a widget, a widget can be copied pretty quick, unless you've got some really strong patents around it.
Right. Okay, so let me stop there. How about questions? There should be about 100 of them.